created this incredible typography for the symposium Postmodernism, a map for the present. It was Neville Brody, living legend of graphic design, shaping graphic design globally since the 1980s. Neville Brody designed the original wayfinding system of Bundeskunsthalle in 1992, and he also has designed the new Bundeskunsthalle design, but also the exhibition graphics for the exhibition Everything at Once Post-Modernity 1967 to 1992. But the catalogue of the exhibition has been designed by Studio Yukiko, a multi-headed, I think 10 people collective office in Berlin, whose work we will also talk about. This panel is on more than graphic design, and Eva takes the lead.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you, Neville, for coming from London. Thank you, Yukiko, for jumping in. We would have had here Markus Peichel, the son of Gustav Peichel, our architect, who was also, as Neville was in the 80s, very famous for journalism, for newspaper design. But we will start now first with your work. Neville Brody is one of the legends from its time. He was and is a rock star of graphic.
Eva, I'm leaving now.
May
He's
I
still
say
alive,
this?
Eva.
His book, which came out in 1988, The Graphic Design of Neville Brody, is as long today the most published book on graphic design. I should say this. He was even claimed to be a rock star in his field. So anyway, we are really proud and happy to have him as the graphic designer of our institution in the 1990s. And we recovered him now to redesign our corporate design and identity. The wayfinding system is glued on the walls of the foyer, and we're picking up right now the playfulness from the first days, the eagerness to show something different. Bonn has been established in 1991. Bonster is the new kit from Postmodernism exhibition 2023. Thank you, Neville, for coming. Thank you for your contribution and input. I know you prepared some slides last minute. I'm sorry for technical issues, but let's go and have a look at it.
Well, I was just showing some work from the face. I mean, this is work now which is 40 years old, which is unbelievable. How old are you guys?
I'm 40.
You're 40?
Yeah.
So you were born when this came out?
Yeah.
And I wasn't born. I mean, I'm 42.
Born.
No.
Well, this should be an interesting conversation. So the Face magazine, which at the time felt more like a fanzine for a very small group of people in the middle of Soho in London, who all used to go to the same pub together. And it was musicians, it was artists, it was architects, writers, actors. I mean, I've always denied being postmodern, but this grew out of a really postmodern situation. There were no boundaries, and the Face magazine really was about that, the fact that you could have reportage next to fashion, next to opinion, next to... So all of these things got really mashed, and in a way, the Face broke the mold of what a magazine could do. And because it was small and independent, it allowed us to really question the rules of what was happening. And we weren't thinking of what changes it was making. We were just experimenting because we could.
It was the simultaneity which happened, right? Everything at once, everything clashed together, all kinds of discourses, issues, disciplines, politics with fashion, design with lifestyle, but also economical questions. When came this concept up of mixing all these messages?
Well, I think it was the culture that we'd grown up with in urban Britain, where politics was very much part of youth activity and culture. So music made in the UK at that time was almost always with a political edge somehow.
As punk was probably...
Punk, and then ska with the Specials, and then the Clash that sat between those, and then Sue, and then David Bowie, who also went to the same art school as Sue and the Banshees. So the music thing and the art thing were strongly connected. Johnny Rotten was at art school. And then you had Malcolm McLaren, who was obviously connected with Vivienne Westwood, who then created the Destroy T-shirts and Fuck Out, Let's Dance.
Surrounding of Sex Pistols. Yes.
Yeah, so there was a lot of little things going on. So this is just the culture we grew up with. It was not discipline specific.
And you claimed you would be more a punk than a postmodernist. How came this together?
I'm not a postmodernist. I never will be. I don't like postmodernism. Sorry, Eva, we've had this conversation quite often.
A long time.
Yes, I hate postmodernism. And we hated it then. But I think looking back, we didn't realise that in hating postmodernism, we were pure postmodernists.
But I think in every country it's a bit slightly different. I think in Great Britain, since it was a huge depression at the time, and there was a lot of counterculture happening as well, I guess it was just a totally different approach, right?
Yeah, it was very raw in the UK. And we had, unlike what can happen in a lot of other countries, at that time we had a really violent extreme right. We had the National Front. And then over here we had Marxists and New Socialists. I designed the cover for New Socialist magazine, which is here. So we were allowed to have these extremities, but in the middle it was raw. And somehow out of that came what we now relate to as kind of modern culture. You know, so this cover here is what I call proto-digital. It was done probably in 82, 83. We had no idea the personal computer was coming. But the aesthetics we created then had a major impact on what happened. And everything changes by technology. As if you look through the exhibition, you see how important changes in technology were in terms of shifts in culture and shifts in thinking, the way we relate to each other.
Gertrud Koch just mentioned that as well, for sure. But you also have a very, somebody, I think Eric Spiekermann said so, painterly approach to graphic design. It is like a canvas for you, but also like a freestyle media, like a jazz musician would mix styles and methods and rhythm and switch energy in the same piece. So how would you describe your own practice, maybe as a musician, as a magician, as a performer? As a performer.
Yeah. But I think, and you guys are the same, I think performance is such a big part of pure creativity. Unfortunately, we're in an era now which I call the era of engineering, where all our social media spaces, all our web spaces, our digital spaces are highly hygienic. They're cleansed spaces, and we have these windows that we can perform in. You know, what curtains do we put up today? What dance are we going to do in front of the TV? And that's it. So it's a constrained space. But in print, in magazines, on record covers, in music, how you present the idea was fluid. Scale. You could have a scaled headline. You could use white space. But now those things are very rare. You guys did the catalogue, and you had that freedom of journey and taking the reader on a cinematic adventure. And in a way, that's what we were doing with the culture. It was all cinematic adventure. So the fluidity then meant nothing was ever fixed. It was more poetic in a way. And we hated decoration. We hated postmodernist decoration. So it was all about the journey for the user, the journey for the reader, the journey for the viewer.
Yeah, and that would show the face for sure.
And it was experimental. You could do anything except this. This is my only postmodern piece, and it's actually
for your own show.
It's probably one of the pieces that I did that I really don't like much.
But we have it in the show because
we have it in the show.
As you said, like it is a good pick to see what comes out when typography becomes fluid, when it all mixes and matches of forms and colors, but still come and stays within the boundaries of possibilities.
It looks like a cartoon, though. It looks like a pastiche of postmodernism. And then this was for the cover for the V&A Postmodernist exhibition.
This is more Brody style.
In 2011, you mean? By Glenn Adamson and Jane Pavitt?
Jane Pavitt, yeah. So we did the magazine cover that went with that. So this was all about postmodernism collapsing and how it was a facade. And then we're here now with Pomo, and the font was a lot of fun because as we did the original Bonn typeface, which the Bundeskunsthalle has been using, it was so enjoyable actually to become a bit more postmodern about the way we thought about it and make it much more responsive and fluid and playful. And yeah, it's been great coming here and seeing it in real life. And that's the complete set. Die Postmoderne, and then we've just done a poster in Japan that's used it, so we've pushed it on again. And then I have a new book. It's not a cheap plug. Et voilà.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say you are not really a postmodernist yourself, and when you talk about sort of embellishments or not liking embellishments or decoration in itself, like that sounds like you're more of a modernist, actually, no?
I'm a pure modernist.
You're a pure modernist?
Yeah, I'm 100% a pure modernist.
So does it get kind of frustrating for you to be actually sort of being like in this bracket of postmodernists? Like, is it, yes, what does it do to you?
Well, but kind of, modernism is a broad church. In the middle of that church, which started with Dada in 1916, pretty much, and again, driven by technology. So you had the change in printing techniques, in mass distribution, in halftone printing, so you could actually put images into print. And then with the implosion of the First World War, you have this then explosion, this big bang, which then becomes Bauhaus and becomes constructivism. And then at the same time, you have cubism and vorticists and futurism. So two strands came out of that. One was the Mies van der Rohe strand of pure modernism. And then over here you have the strand which is more Andy Warhol and William Burroughs. So you have this experimental side, and Richard Hamilton, who was the biggest influence on my work. And these were all self-figured modernists, in a way, even though they were laying the ground for postmodernism. So I think we need to avoid isms.
Especially truisms, right?
Truisms. Okay, so we've now gone to the keynote.
Sebastién and Johannes, talking about isms. We are about the same age, Johannes and I. From your work, I sense there is like a fascination for postmodern design. But there's also a regard to how the nature of the image has changed through digital circulation. You do a lot of screen design, you also do print design, but you also do like huge poster campaigns, like for Nike, for example. If Neville works with graphic design, like with the canvas, what would be your tool? Would it be the screen?
Well, I think earlier in one of the talks, and you mentioned it as well, I think the limitations of technology, or the technology in itself, allows you to sort of obviously practice a certain way at a certain time. So, for example, you did obviously a lot of things by hand, which even our generation really misses. In fact, we really try and go back to cutting things up ourselves and scanning them again, just to feel like we're actually creating things that are outside of the platforms that we're using. And I think there's a real danger, actually, the way we are using technology, because we're so bound by corporations, for example, Adobe, or even the distribution of the image via Instagram or Meta is very complicated, and the emancipation as well from those platforms are almost impossible. You cannot go back to Quark Express, for example, or other old softwares. You're almost in our industry, you're confined to using certain tools, and I think we always try and be quite conscious of that, and we always try and push those tools to a certain extent by even finding kind of hacks in how we use After Effects, or I don't know, using them kind of wrong, or even finding mistakes and being kind of happy with lucky mistakes, for example.
Show us some images. Show us what you do. Oh,
just to add to this as well, I think also like we are also like surrounded by visuals like on screens so much digitally, and I think you can also get tired of it. It's also like something flat. And what said Johannes also, we also try to bring back like how we can just get challenge the flatness of the digital screen as well, just bringing also a bit more texture, or like bring more new ways to use also this Canva as well. I like what you said, that we are maybe also as well performers. I was trying to think for myself, what does it mean, performers? And I think like a performer cannot be present or valid without a public. And I think as a practice, or the Yukiko practice, or as designer, visual designer, the same as your practice, that we try to make our practice, or like our visuals, being seen as well, not to maybe blend it, but that people can notice it as well, and just be that they can question themselves when they see a visual, and not like be more passive, just have like being more seen by the public, which I think
the catalogue I find interesting. Because I really think right now we need to be embracing things that should break. And because it's at the point where something breaks that something new happens. It's what we were talking about a little earlier, Kolja. So it's always finding that edge. Where does something not work? So then what could come from that? What could be new from that? So it's a fluidity over time and process as well. It should always be moving ahead. It shouldn't be like, okay, I found my rhythm now. I'm just going to stay in this groove. It's the English band Wire, and their first single, 12XU. Their first album, every song was less than 2 minutes long, because they said, well, why would we make it longer? Why would we repeat what we've done? So there was that spirit as well, which is sort of a postmodern spirit, actually, which is, you've done something, okay, what's next? So the end of history, in a way, as you were talking about.
Let's have a look.
Okay, so yeah, we're just going to click through some slides. I don't know if this is working. This is us. But just, yeah, the studio is comprised of many different people. Maybe I'll just quickly speaking many different languages. In fact, I'm the only German-speaking person. I mean, we all speak a bit of German, but the only German in the studio as such. So we have predominantly, it's also girls at the studio. This is not all of us, but it's a wide mix of many people under 40, I would say. We work a lot in publication design, and this is maybe the kind of also the bridge that we have with you. I think that I think we're very true to pop as well, and I think maybe the way that we use popular culture or pop as an aesthetic is actually in a kind of postmodernist way. I dare to say, by kind of using quotes and really being quite bold with the quotes and sometimes quite obvious, and also in a way, yeah, maximalist, if you like, as well. So there's also things that you can see is that there's no real studio style, because in the same spirit as what you just said about The Wire, it's also about really always trying new things out and sort of like letting go of your darlings, you know, and just and being quite collaborative in a way in the studio, I would say. Some campaign work, but I'm just going to skip forward to the catalog. Sorry, or just quickly. Flaneur is a magazine that we are doing, which is a nomadic magazine. We always base the magazine around one street per issue in the world. So far, it's been streets in Taipei, in Sao Paulo, Moscow, Berlin, of course. Where else did we go? I can't remember.
Montreal.
Montreal.
But I mean, the way we use the design, I mean, the same as, I mean, you kind of lay the first steps. I mean, from what I remember also from my classes in school, you know, you were in the being taught, and I think we also try to experiment as well each time, just also like keep doing, like using a new Canva every time we start a new project. Also, we also like, once we've done something, we also want to try to break other boundaries, like also how much readability or how far we can get with readability, with typefaces, or with with words or with letters. And I think sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not, but I think it's also how you learn it, how you see people react to it, because I think us as visual creators, I mean, it's also different because you embrace it all the time, and it's important to see how people react, and sometimes it doesn't work, or sometimes it's harder, but then it's also how you can keep challenging yourself as a...
Most of these typefaces are also all done by hand. This is an issue about a street that is actually the Boulevard Périphérique around Paris. It's the motorway. So we really try and embrace almost the kind of ugliness of the street in itself. And I think this embracing of ugliness and the kind of experimentation that leads from it is something that's also almost, in a way, modernist, actually. Sort of the idea that there is no, the beauty in itself lies really on the eyes of the beholder. It's kind of more playground for us anyway. And these are some of the typefaces that we created. Okay, I'll just skip through this. Sorry, it's a lot of a lot of slides.
So we did the old logo for this.
Sorry,
we did the previous branding for.
Did you? Oh yeah.
Oh, you did Haus der Kulturen der Welt also.
The one before the previous, I think. Yeah.
From the late 80s, and then
exactly.
A lot of coincidences.
That's quite funny. I mean, the idea, maybe then I will just quickly tell you about this is the fact that there was a change of directorship. Bonaventure and Diegung and Henriette Gallus took over the directorship, and it was really the typefaces itself, or the typeface that we designed, is really based on actually movement, which you can sadly not see as these slides are not working. But it's a very modular system that can be always transformed based on movement, based on speech, and to really kind of take away these Latin letter forms and really kind of like make them organic and abstract them in a way that goes beyond this idea of, well, there's a kind of, obviously there's a little bit of a problem of these, the Latin alphabet being sort of like representing the world in itself, and this being the house of the cultures of the world, which these letters stand for. So we really wanted to embrace something that isn't actually a Latin alphabet in a way, and that is kind of changed based on speech and movement. Anyway, but let's see the catalogs, and then you can talk a little bit about that.
It should have been a tombstone.
Yes.
Like the idea in the beginning was really to make it a graveyard, Sepulkralkultur auf Deutsch. So the idea was to have it cut out and, of course, to declare death to postmodernity.
Well, is it though? Because the question is, obviously there is the years that lend themselves to proclaiming its death, but it's also almost like a milestone, or it can be also a milestone in a way. But yeah, I think we picked up the ideas of the stone further in the publication by really kind of going, having quite a lot of fun with it. Also typographically, I think we're referencing, we used a lot of free fonts, a lot of system fonts. We obviously have
probably Neville Brody fonts.
Maybe hijacked. But we really tried to be quite fluid with the design.
It's actually quite clean for you. It's actually structured and quite clean.
No, we are quite clean institution.
No, we are. But one isn't.
I think there is always, within everything that we do, there is strict rules, and there is obviously, like, you have to have a grid in order to smash the grid in a way.
Yeah, I see you've pushed things where you can.
Yeah. But I think, I don't know, I think as you can see also with some of the typefaces, the idea of quotation in itself, it being sort of something that we pick up from postmodernism is being carried through quite extensively. We even have a typeface that you can see here that is building bricks stuck on top of each other that create these letter forms, and we really think that they lend themselves to also obviously really nice capital letters, and I think it's a fun little detail.
But I think I know what you mean. What we could have been maybe louder on the design or use like way much bigger typefaces or title. But I think it was also like a challenge. For example, like here the image captions. I mean they are bigger than the titles in the end of the essays. It's also so challenging, like in the body text. I mean, it's very nerdy, but then the footnotes are way bigger than the normal text, and usually you will never have those elements bigger. You just want to read the body text, and then maybe just to subtly challenge the way of how things are laid out on a catalog, and just having the title of each essay very small, and then the author's name even smaller, and just play a bit more with those parameters.
Yeah, I wasn't being critical.
No, I know.
Just an observation.
But it's a really radical idea to make the footnotes bigger than the main text. We need some days to actually think about that. If that's okay, it plays out so wonderfully. For once, it pays justice to footnotes who have been suppressed since the invention of printing. But on the other hand, it's also a very postmodern gesture and a reflection on periphery and center and who has a voice. And it's just a fantastic conceptual thing. And as all amazing conceptual ideas, they need a few days to take in.
I mean, it's a kind of a... it's a tricky exercise, or it's a tricky project in itself, because you don't want to create something that feels postmodern that is from the era, right? So actually creating something that's somehow, or like a pastiche print publication would be wrong. So like actually having these gestures, like the footnotes being bigger, or having somehow turning things around, or trying to do things almost wrong, are the things that would, in our view, make it postmodern. Because like we are the outsiders anyway, you know, we only look at the era for not having taken part in it anyway. But these are obviously it was a fantastic pleasure to have been able to work with this image material that has been a constant inspiration to us. I mean, people like James Wines or Site Architects, for example, or Studio 46, they are all, or Ettore Sozzas, obviously, they are huge inspirations to us. And
I remember when I was visiting in the studio and Sebastién saw the chair of Studio 65, Capitello, that you just clicked through, and you're really like stuck on the object, like really glued. Oh, that's in the show. And then in front of my eyes, you just made it double page big. That's exactly like this, like extreme attention to each detail without having any preconcept of how to represent them, but really taking from the language that you find.
If you go back 2 slides, there's the Memphis spread. And I thought, this is even more ugly than it is in real life.
Yeah, it's like a brochure.
It looks crazy. We were juggling around this page 10,000 times, and it got worse and worse.
It does look like a catalogue.
It does.
I mean,
as the exhibition is, yes.
I also really like the Monty Python typeface that Seb found here, which I think is also really great.
Dietrich Dietrichsen also wrote something nice about the catalog. He said, "My 2-year-old son loves it. It's the most colorful book he's ever seen." It speaks for your choices of color, but it also speaks for the printing technique used. It's really very colorful.
But talking about this in comparison to postmodernism and the era, I had a question to Neville. What do you think, especially through the lens of young people, what is the biggest cliché of postmodernism?
Postmodern. Or what are you saying, Eva?
No, I'm thinking, I mean, we have here the other generation picking up the style and the language and the ideas of the era. And we are always, I think we're in this double bind, because there's this contradiction in postmodernism. There's this pros and cons, good and bad taste. There's like lots of these clashes.
I think there's sort of 3 things, isn't there? I mean, with postmodernism, if you look at everything, there's intention. You know, what are you going in with? Is it a political positioning? Is it a relationship to culture that you want to change? Is it an impact you want to have on the audience? So what is your intention going in? And then how do you manifest that? Becomes then, if you lead by intention, then you can create something new. But the thing that always happens at the end is a stylization. And it's a stylization that freezes it in time and stops it being effective as an action. And that's what happened with postmodernism, and that's what's happening with postmodernism. The cliches start to come in, it starts to be a self-feeding language, it becomes easy to reference for advertising agencies and cheap product makers, and then it sort of becomes a mass taste.
And it becomes a surface again with no content.
This is the cycle that happens. You have an explosion of intent that says that old stuff doesn't mean the same anymore. We want to do something different. There's new issues we need to reflect. How do we manifest that? That's often with new technologies and new capabilities. And then after a while, it moves from being a shock to the system to a stylized statement that then neutralizes the shock. And that's the cycle that keeps happening, and it seems to get faster and faster. And in the end, the Face magazine was a failure because we were changing every month, we were changing everything. And then after 4 or 5 years, people were expecting us to change every month. And if we did 2 issues that were similar, we got really criticized. And then people started copying the style of it and putting ads in the Face that looked like the Face. And then I knew it was over, we'd failed.
Okay. How would you respond to that it's only a surface which is picked up again and again to underline itself?
I mean, yeah, I think, I'm not sure. I think, you know, I think in the way, I mean, I see or I understand the postmodernist era, and it's especially in England, where you were practicing a lot. There was this whole political turmoil happening at the time. There was the privatization. There was, you know, the miners' strikes, for example, which then had
now,
like it's, but like all these things, they had such amazing outcomes in creativity. You know, you had like acid house coming from, you know, raves in the God knows where, and then you had, and this was also somehow the turn of the norm, you know, where people were before working in these warehouses, they were or the generation before was working, they were now dancing, and this whole idea of turning things around and really reappropriating a situation in itself. That is, I believe, in the times that we're facing right now, it's also happening, and it's happening maybe much more on a digital sphere, on Instagram, for example, where people are, okay, it was a failed revolution by the Arab Spring, obviously, as well, a few years ago. But the whole idea of people coming together and trying to overturn an event and trying to make the good out of the bad, in a way, and creating culture is, I think, something that's happening now.
But I mean, it's so true. It does tend to come out of political turmoil quite often. And it comes out of a real need for expression and form and recognition. And then once it's gone past that stylized point, it tends to become decadence.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what happens. It happened in the 60s, happened in the 50s, the 70s, the 80s, definitely. You've got the Blitz Kids thing later, which was a theatrical expression of decadence.
You hated Blitz Club, you once said.
We'll talk about it. So that's the cycle. And then a new generation has to destroy that decadence.
I think it's also the nature of design in itself.
See, acid house was decadent. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we're just making things look bad or good. You know, it's still a surface in a way. But if you scrap away the surface, hopefully there's a little bit more. I don't know. I'm always hopeful.
Of course.
But I would ask, is there still like some everlasting values of postmodernism to be extracted? Like, for example, consciousness of context, irony, breaking rules. It's hard to destroy these things.
Sorry, what was your question? There's a problem, like the sound here is a little bit strange.
Yeah, I also have problems hearing you. If there's any way fixing the sound, I hardly hear anyone. Is there some like postmodernism became a style, that's for sure. But is there is there some everlasting values that can be extracted that everything postmodern shares, and and you can't destroy them? For example, regard to context, like consciousness of context, irony, which is a tool also for making the context conscious.
But we have a speaker now. We didn't have a speaker before.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you. And breaking of rules, very basic, right? You could also see these values applied in modernism, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But is there something about postmodernism that's everlasting?
What do you think?
Yes. It was a rhetorical question.
I don't really know, guys.
I think the idea of risk taking is maybe something that's for sure something that prevails throughout whatever era we're in now, post. But yeah, hopefully, I think. I mean, obviously, I think irony. It's a tool that also gets old quite quickly. I think that it's something that you can put out of the bag and then use it sometimes. But I think it's also, I don't know. I think right now, I think we need a lot of in the day and age where we're not very sure whether it's real news or fake news, or where we're constantly bombarded with images that we don't know whether they're AI generated even, or if they actually exist. I think we're in such a dangerous position right now where I think even having irony and looking at it sort of in a things that in a humorous way are wonderful and have their own space, but I think we have to be very careful with that as well and how things are perceived. I think that's also this kind of sender and receiver idea. Like, how do we, what are we getting actually in terms of media?
And how do we withstand standardization that comes with these automatic tools like AI,
exactly,
or with the standardized working environments that you talked about before?
Yeah.
But this talk is also meant to be about the history of Bundeskunsthalle, which Neville Brody has witnessed from the beginning and shaped. So I wondered if it would be possible to also get another person into the room who can't be there today because, unfortunately, he's ill. Markus Peichel. Neville, could you explain?
I'm going to ask Eva to translate, because by the time your voice gets here...
We would like to get in our dear friend and guest, Markus Peichel, who is unfortunately not with us today due to COVID, but...
Double COVID.
Double COVID, poor him. Greetings.
How did you get into Bundeskunsthalle in the beginning?
How did you get to Bundeskunsthalle?
Oh, how did I get to Bundeskunsthalle?
Anecdotes.
Funny thing is, we used to fly in from London, and but there is a story here because we.
But 32 years ago,
we used to come in with into Cologne airport with kind of plans and roles, and Germany was quite different then.
1991.
Yeah, 1991. And we were working with an architect on our side, Joe Hagan, who is Ghanaian and used to run a lot of clubs in London, was a close friend of the studio. And we would always get pulled into a side room.
Into what, sorry?
Into a side room for security when we landed in Germany. Got involved with Bundeskunsthalle because Markus Peichel, who had been editor of Wiener magazine in Austria, was then editing Tempo magazine in Germany. And I was, because the Face and Tempo and Actuel in Paris, and then maybe Wet magazine, there was a kind of connection between all the magazines because there was a joint narrative. And Markus asked me to come and art direct one issue, which I haven't seen for a long time, and it's in the show, which is a nice homage to Markus. Markus then introduced us to his dad.
How was that?
Difficult, because Herr Professor Gustav Peichel was very much an Austrian architect who was really clear about what he wanted, and quite not authoritarian, but very strong, as you know. And he built this what feels like a castle. Actually, it's a castle of postmodernism. And he brought us into all the communication language and the signage, and the font was inspired by the building itself. It was based on squares, on curves, on circular forms. So it was a very geometrically based story. And as you can see when you're in here, the proportions are huge. And we're all very small in the space.
We can't even hear each other on the other end. No, it's better now.
But it's a monumental space. All the space is all about the building. And we're kind of, puny humans in here.
Postmodernism is also about scale, and I would also say a bit about megalomania, right? And also...
But that's architecture.
Machoism, architecture as machos, yes, for sure. But we're very glad that things got intertwined and connected at that point, and we had the chance to meet again. I have organized a show of Neville's in the Hewitt Museum Corporation of AIGA in New York, and witnessed his work at that time. So somehow things are always coming together, and I guess we are also getting to work again together. This was fantastic. Come out, I have to say. I'm very glad about this possibility, as well as it was fantastic to have Bonn as a 3.0 format.
It's interesting, because I think what we've done has emanated from the building and the architecture. I think what you guys have done completely destroys all of that. It is so unfamiliar in relation to any part of the building and the environment. And I think that's great. I think it's such a fresh thought and a breath of fresh air to come and say, well, it doesn't have to be all of this. We can make other performances.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also, I think that's the nature of the catalogue, is also that it's not just a catalogue, right, that represents the museum. I mean, obviously it has all the artifacts of the museum show, but I think it also it has value as a standalone publication.
But this will outlive the show.
Yeah.
Yes.
When the show is gone, yeah. That's postmodernism.
The baby is Coco, the daughter of new models who will speak in an hour.
Okay. But yeah, the catalogue will outlive the show, and then that'll be in the next show about postmodernism.
Postmodernism.
Exactly.
Any questions to each other? Do you have questions for Neville?
I mean, I'm interested in how did it feel to revisit Bonn as a typeface, and how did you approach it?
It's 30 years old now, which is also kind of mad.
But it looks very fresh.
It feels, things have cycled round. And a lot of the stuff we were doing in the 80s, like with Fuse, which was our type experimental magazine, some of the other work we were doing, it sort of looks like now in some ways. What it says to me is that we've lost the art of experimentation over that time. And then Bonn is so geometric that it sort of has a resonance with this age of engineering that we're living in. It's quite clean. So the font that we developed, which we call Bonster, because it's Monster Bonn, it sort of tries to play with that again. So that was a lot of fun.
Thank you for it.
Thank you. Are we going to have a beer now?
We will. Thank you, everybody.
There's half an hour time for beer or any other drink or bite. And you will see each other at 6 o'clock for the lecture by Dietrich Dietrichsen on style. We have a 2-hour block. New models will respond to Dietrich Dietrichsen with an own presentation about style, followed by a short conversation between the three of them. And at 7, original Blitz kids will take stage. See you in a bit. Thank you. Thank you, Neville, Johannes, and Sebastián.